My name is Karima Ramji, and I'm the Associate Director of International, Indigenous, and Strategic Initiatives at the University of Victoria's Co-op Education Program and Career Services. I'm also privileged to serve as co-chair of the ACE-WIL Research Committee. I'd like to start by acknowledging with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territories the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. I'm coming to you today from my home in the Wasanich territory. As we come together today while staying apart, we may be gathering on other traditional lands around the province and across the country. I acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge, laws, and philosophies of the Indigenous peoples with whom we all share these lands today. As we start our session, may I please encourage everyone on the call to share their name and institution in the chat. You're also very welcome to include your own land acknowledgement. Today's session is brought to you by the ACE-WIL Research Committee. It's wonderful to have so many of you join us as we officially launch what we hope will be a valuable resource for you all. This resource, 6 Tools for Diversity in Work Integrated Learning, was inspired by a research project that was undertaken by the ACE-WIL Research Committee some years ago. The committee, led by Earl Anderson and with Dr. Nancy Johnston as lead researcher, asked the question, what are employer perspectives of hiring students from international pathways? This research provided deep insights that has informed the development of the tools that you will see today. In the audience today, we have work integrated learning practitioners and employers. We hope that these tools will be helpful to employers wishing to attract, hire, and onboard students from international pathways, and to WIL practitioners as you support your employers in these endeavors. I would like to acknowledge the hard work of our committee members, starting with my co-chair, Andrea Sader, and members Earl Anderson, Danielle McCann, Christina Stewart, Letitia Henville, Natasha DeLay, Rhonda Coral, Sarah McQuillan, Stephanie Kunar. You'll be meeting all of us through the course of this session. A special thank you also goes to Shadab Shah, who took on this project as part of a co-op work term. Shadab has just graduated with his Master of Global Management degree from Royal Roads University. Congratulations, Shadab. Shadab has continued to stay with us past his graduation to lead this initiative. I also wish to thank Dr. Nancy Johnston for joining us today, Saran Jiwani and Andrea Sader for driving this session in the background, and Natalie Shearer, Program Coordinator, Professional Development Resource Hub for ACE-WIL, for chairing our session today. Natalie, over to you.
Thank you, Karima. So just a couple of quick notes for today's session. The Zoom chat is open and being monitored by Andrea Sador and Shadab Shah, so please feel free to use the chat to share any ideas, questions, links. I see many folks are already introducing themselves in there, so thank you. The main sessions today are being recorded, but the chat and the breakout rooms later on will not be recorded. If you have any questions or concerns about being recorded or the recording, please reach out to Andrea Sador, whose email address is in the chat. Please leave your microphones on mute unless you are speaking throughout the course of the session today. And now the format for today's session is on your screens. And without further ado, I'm going to hand our virtual microphone over to Dr. Nancy Johnston, who will be giving us some background and context on the research that led up to the creation of this toolkit.
Thanks, Natalie. Appreciate it. And thanks also to the ACE-WIL committee in British Columbia for inviting me back. I was actually a founding member of this committee many, many years ago, so it's really nice to be invited back, and in particular to be invited back to this resource session that this committee is putting on that is really a result of a research project we started some years ago now. And they asked that I just provide a quick overview so that you can situate the workshop that we're doing today within the research that kind of stimulated it. So if we can, the research that we were talking about is called Perspectives of BC Co-op Employers who hire what we ended up calling and coining a little acronym for Students from International Pathways, or SFIPs. And I'll just make a quick aside on that. That doesn't mean just visa students or students here studying on a visa, but it means any student who did their primary living and schooling outside of the Canadian context and then came to Canada as a new immigrant, perhaps as a returning Canadian who was schooled abroad, to come and live and work ultimately in our work integrated learning programs here in BC. So it's a large group of people. And if you turn to the next slide, you'll see that that in part informed why we started this research. At the time, in about 2016-17, we were overrun within the BC system because we are a receiving immigrant country and also a very high destination for international students, besieged by large numbers of students who had not worked in Canada before, who may not have schooled in Canada before, but who really wanted to partake in our institutional programs that would give them North American work experience. For some of them who were international students, we know that upwards to 80 or 90% of those had hopes and desires to become landed immigrants. They also wanted to get the work experience, which counts for points towards that process. We knew they were seeking these experiences and wanting these experiences, but anecdotally, we were also aware that they were not having as much success as their Canadian student counterparts in obtaining both job interviews and then job placements themselves. And we also know that there's actually relatively little known in the contemporary literature about employers' perspectives around hiring students from international pathways. And so we wanted to sort of contemporize what we did know so that it could inform, hopefully, some practices, some actions, and maybe some resources, of which this workshop is one, to address what we saw, which was students from international pathways not having quite as much success. So the next slide will very clearly say what was our question, and it really was, what do BC, in this case, employers, perceive and do around the hiring of students from international pathways? Some of the employers that we did work with and that participated in the study were also national and multinational employers, but we just asked them about their experiences hiring within the BC context. That was the scope of our work through ACE-WIL. So the next slide will talk a little bit about the methodology because it was an interesting and a bit of a different methodology. We believed that there were beliefs, values, assumptions, and behaviors out there in the employer world that were not likely to get captured if we did an interview or a series of surveys, because we know what's politically correct to say and we know what's politically correct to do. And this is a very sensitive, loaded topic, as you can well imagine. So we undertook a qualitative, mostly qualitative methodology. It has a front-end quantitative piece to it that in itself had ways of showing how themes emerged just by the way that the participants would rank a series of statements. So we had a series of statements around these 5 themes: labor market, education and hiring, workplace culture, language, capabilities, and workplace effectiveness. And I'll just give you a couple of the contrasting statements so you can get a sense of what the employer participants were faced with when they were asked to rank these statements. A statement under labor market might say, international students take jobs away from Canadian students. And then another statement within that same category would be, gee, more students from international pathways should be hired so that they can help fill our long-term labor market needs, because we're not going to be able to do that on our own. Or under language and culture, a statement might have said, fluency in more than one language is a real asset in our workplace. And another statement might have said, males from some cultures have trouble respecting women in authority in the workplace. So very provocative statements were put out there. They hit the gamut from being supportive of hiring international students right down to being downright against the hiring of international students. And they were about 80 of those statements, and they were only allowed to, they were forced to rank them in certain ways. So there was a lot of interesting secondary and and tertiary thinking and shuffling of the rankings because you were force ranked to only do so many in category 1 versus category 4. It was a Likert scale. Anyway, what this methodology is supposed to do through a factor analysis at the front end is cluster people together who responded to certain statements in similar ways. And from that clustering, or those factors through the factor analysis, the researchers and our research team tried to understand what someone meant who would rank all so many statements in a particular way. The factor analysis showed us, and you can see this on the next page, that there were 4 distinct worldviews or 4 distinct perspectives that emerged. And we interpreted them as follows. A group of folk who think that qualifications are the key and diversity is a real asset. So these are very pro hiring of students from international pathways. Another group of employers who felt that international pathway students are really difficult and just don't fit into the Canadian workplace culture. That was another distinct group. It was quite a bit smaller because these were co-op employers and they often hire through co-op to get that diversity, but they were still, that voice was there statistically when the ANOVA was done. The second was, well, all I do is hire what's going to succeed. And then the little A at the end was to say, but what they really hire in the end is a Canadian, A. And the fourth actual worldview or perspective that was statistically significant around the clustering of these rankings was the statement that I'm philosophically committed to diversity. But then when you went and clustered their behavior statements, for one reason or another, they still hired through a person who was Canadian. So there was a lot more to the study, and I believe you will be able to read about it very shortly in, I think it's the Canadian ACE-WIL special issue, so the International Journal of Work Integrated Learning. So look for it there, but I'm delighted to be able to have shared that on the next page. The conclusions of the study actually led us to the development of the resources to address some of the conclusions of the study. The first view, as I said, was very much pro SFIP, wouldn't have led us to feel there was great gaps or needs for resources. The second view, quite the opposite, and showed us very pointedly where problems were perceived and where there were poor fits from an employer perspective. The third one, as I mentioned, was really focused, as was the fourth, on the notion that employers wanted to hire for fit and for success. And two of the biggest hindrances to that were intercultural challenges, friction, and language issues. So you'll see on the next page, the sort of takeaways from this research were multiple, but in general, we know we need some resources and training for all, for students, for employers, for our own co-op and work integrated learning faculty and staff, because we believe that there's not a fullness of appreciation for the knowledge, skills, and attributes that students from international pathways do have, and that we haven't helped them position themselves as well as they can when they're in the job market. We also know that English as an additional language is a challenge, and all of our institutions need to step it up in order to help students who we admit and say are capable of graduating from our institutions, but who clearly have difficulty expressing themselves orally or in written form. And I think we all know, and today is a really good example of it, that intercultural communications, fluency, effectiveness would be an asset for everyone to learn from. So largely there was a call for taking a regional approach in BC. Come on, institutions, get together, let's all do this together, and developing some incentives and some resources for employers that would help them, and also for practitioners. The other two considerations were ones that would require groups like ACE-WIL to lobby on behalf of students to governments and other agencies that deal with visas and eligibility for certain scholarships and so on, which people also felt were hindrances. So that really takes us to today. and a wonderful example of how research can lead to grounded insights and inform our practice and some of the resources that we develop, such as this TIPS workshop. This research also really sets a basis for comparison for further studies that we can look at down the line. And it certainly begs the question, how do we develop these resources so that they can be put and delivered online in ways that, well, while we have this sort of COVID pause in the mobility of internationalization, we still have many students from international pathways at our own institutions. And we know there are nothing but more and more programs that are going to try and bring students together in a remote environment. So this is all extremely pertinent, and all the more reason to try and put some of these resources in the online environment, such as we're doing today. So today's work, even though it's fresh and newly created, it stems from observations made several years ago that led to us formalizing this and conducting the multi-institutional research project that I just described above. And what's really wonderful, and doesn't happen all the time, from that research, some of the requests have been honored by your ACE-WIL research community. And today is one of those opportunities for you to partake in, comment, and actually help shape these kinds of resources as we go forward. So this is your ACE community at work. I want to thank you again for having me, and I'm welcome to provide any other insights. I'm going to hang with you guys for the rest of the morning. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. So I'm going to now hand it over to Shadab Shah, who will give us an introduction and an overview of the SFIP toolkit that was recently created. So go ahead, Shadab.
Thank you, Natalie, for the introduction, and thank you, Nancy, for providing the project background and context. So here's the tool, as you can see on the screen. What you will see next is a result of 10 months of work based on feedback from 20+ employers, both large and small, 19 work integrated learning practitioners across several BC post-secondary institutions, and of course, the ACE-WIL Research Committee. Although it's difficult to summarize 10 months of work in the next 10 minutes, I'll give it a shot. With that, if you can turn it over to the next page. So this is a little bit of preview, background, context, and some data around why we did this study. I'm not going to get into this in detail because Nancy already provided an excellent overview and the background of the tool. But before you use the tool, you can take a look at that page to figure out what we're trying to do here. So without further ado, let me get into the tool. The toolkit aims to provide helpful resources and tips for employers, both large and small, to attract, hire, and onboard students from international pathways. Also, work integrated learning practitioners could use this tool to support their students as they continue to pursue their work integrated learning endeavors. In the next 10 minutes, I hope to highlight a few key takeaways from each of the resources that you will see on the next few slides. Before I begin, though, it's hard to discuss student hiring without talking about the realities of COVID at the moment. COVID has impacted all of us, but the impact of the pandemic on students or international students is especially telling. Having said that, we wanted to provide a toolkit through this session and the resource that you will see later to help employers and work integrated learning practitioners navigate this challenging environment. And I do have to provide a quick rider here. This is by no means a comprehensive set of strategies, resources, and tools for achieving diversity and inclusion in the workplace, but rather just a starting point for employers and WIL practitioners to support students from international pathways. So before we get into the tool, a quick reminder of what Nancy mentioned. When you hear the term SFIP, or Students from International Pathways, for the context of today's discussion and the toolkit, this includes learners at post-secondary institutions who may have come to Canada through various immigration pathways. They may be foreign nationals on a study visa. They could be refugees, new immigrants, returning students, or permanent residents. The commonality that we would like you to keep in mind for these students is that they have an international background. All right, so before I share the tool in detail, just a little bit of context. As you can see on the top of the screen there, um, as to why this toolkit could be useful. According to 2019 BC labor market outlook, BC is expected to post around 861,000 job openings in the next 10 years. And just a side note, there are about 56,000 post-secondary international students in BC that could fill perhaps some of these roles which require a post-secondary education. So there's some data to provide context of how this could be useful in driving economy, helping employers, as well practitioners. So there are 6 tools that we want to share with you today. They are centered around 4 themes. The first one is we want to talk about what employers can do at a strategic level or at a planning level, and how they could integrate diversity and inclusion for students from international pathways. And that's going to be the focus of tool 1. Um, can you go back, Natalie, for just a second before that's okay. All right, tool 2, 3, and 4 are going to focus more on how employers could customize some of their recruiting or human resource practices to attract, hire, and onboard students from international pathways. Then we jump to how we could support, how employers could support onboarding for SFIP. What could they do different, specific, customized for SFIP? And finally, uh, while we do all of this, how do we measure success of some of these new initiatives or different initiatives that we hope employers will take up in the next few years? With that, let me jump to the first tool. Thank you, Natalie. All right, so this tool focuses on encouraging employers to start thinking about SFIP when they plan their organizational diversity and inclusion strategy, their planning, and so on. And with that in mind, I'm not going to read through the entire slide. I'm sure in the breakout session, you'll have more opportunities to discuss this in detail, but specifically we want employers to collaborate and partner more with post-secondary institutions, specifically with a focus on SFIP, support some of the advocacy initiatives, such as creating wage subsidies for students who are on a study permit in Canada, developing intercultural awareness and competencies for employees within the workforce so that they can welcome SFIP, understand SFIP, and work with SFIP more effectively. There are more tools on the screen here. I'm not going to get into all of the tools right now for lack of time. With that, let me jump to the next theme, which is focused around how employers could customize their human resource practices. And one of the examples is creating barrier-free job descriptions. By no means are we saying that this hasn't been done or employers don't do it right now. This is in some cases a reminder. If you're doing it, it's really useful and helpful, and research supports that. And if you're not doing it, some successful ways to do or to create barrier-free job description. Again, I will not read through the entire slide, but just a few items when you create a job description, how to create one that is more open, barrier-free, and attractive to SFIP. So you could highlight your D&I goals, policies, and practices, describe how your organization's work culture is accepting of people from different cultures, what specific initiatives you do, and maybe showcase the diversity of your leadership team and how they come from different backgrounds and they have succeeded in your organization to reach leadership levels. Again, I'll not go through all of them, but there are additional tools here, and each of the tool that you will see today, you're able to take a printout, and there are small boxes next to each of the bullets. You can check them off as you work towards doing some of the things that are recommended in the tool. With that, let me move on to the next one. Thank you, Natalie. Again, staying on the theme of customizing human resource practices, reducing implicit or unconscious bias, we are suggesting that you anonymize, or employers anonymize resumes. And there are a lot of advantages in doing that. There's a small blurb there at the top saying a study a few years ago suggested that names which sound Asian received fewer callbacks than those with Anglo-sounding names. So there's some research supporting that, and what you see on the screen is a step-by-step process that employers could follow to anonymize their resumes. You could take out identifying information such as name, address, citizenship, country of origin, schools they attended perhaps, languages that they speak, and gender. Again, it depends on the context and the industry that you're in, but some of this identifying information could be barriers when hiring students from international pathways. With that, let me move on to the next slide. We're still staying on customizing human resource practices. And this one is focused on conducting culturally sensitive job interviews. And again, I will not read through these slides here, but few things that I want to highlight here is reviewing the questions that you're going to ask in the interview in advance for any bias, any implicit bias or unconscious bias. You could ask questions which are related to the duties of the job and use situational interview questions so that even if they may not have those experiences in Canada, they could talk about their work experience or how they gained this experience outside of Canada. Practice active listening, seek clarification if the student's answer is not clear, and don't assess a student just based on their accent or the way of speaking and so on and so forth. And there's additional information on body language and so on. So a lot of information on this slide again, but you could print it out as a way to practice some of these strategies. Moving on to the next one. All right, so we move on from hiring to onboarding. And again, we've had 3 sub-themes here. So what could you do when you hire students from international pathways and onboard them? So from a process perspective, you could provide them an overview of your culture. You know, you could provide them playbooks and guides which help them understand the process through which the organization functions. In the people space, you could connect them with a mentor or a buddy who potentially maybe speaks the same language or may come from a similar background. You could invite them to relevant meetings or connect them to professional and social groups which they identify with and make them feel comfortable. And again, this list is not comprehensive, neither is it supposed to be something that you have to follow all of them. You can pick and choose based on your industry context and your organization context. In the performance space, provide clear job expectations and goals, provide regular feedback, and so on. So some stuff that you can do for onboarding students from international pathways. With that, let me move to the next slide. Finally, when you do all the things that you're already doing or that new initiatives that you plan to invest in, how do we measure if the needle has moved? So a few suggested metrics. Again, you can customize this, use all of them, some of them, but we are recommending track the annual number or percentage of SFIP that you've hired through work integrated learning placements. Has that number moved? Has it changed? Track the number or percent of WIL roles filled by SFIP in the previous years. Look for number or percentage of SFIP that you've hired for full-time roles after their work integrated learning term was completed, and so on and so forth. So these are again some suggestions that we hope you will take up. So that was a quick, speedy version of talking through the toolkit. Thank you for letting me share the toolkit and the work that we've done in the last 10 months. We hope that you will use it to advance diversity and inclusion when you hire and support students in their work integrated learning endeavors. With that, let me hand the baton back to Natalie for the next segment of the event. Thank you for your attention, and over to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Shadab, and thank you for that wonderful overview of the toolkit. I'd like to invite anybody who has thoughts or ideas about the toolkit to share those in the chat now, and we will move on to the next segment of our session today. And I will be handing things over now to Dr. Letitia Henville, Coordinator of Graduate Programs at the UBC Arts Cooperative Education Program, who will be moderating our employer panel. Over to you, Letitia.
Thanks, Natalie, and thanks to those of you who are now sharing your first impressions of the toolkit over in the chat. Hi, everyone. My name is Letitia. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm joining you today from the ancestral, unceded, and stolen territory of the Musqueam people on the land we now call the University of British Columbia. And before I turn over the virtual microphone to our panel of employers, I wanted to share my own first impression of the toolkit. Although I've been part of the team that's been working on developing these resources for the past 10 or so months, when I first saw the interview guide and the anonymizing job resume resource, I thought, oh, wow, this looks like the kind of things we'd recommend to employers who are looking to make their workplaces more diverse and inclusive. And if you're familiar with EDI, with equity, diversity, and inclusivity in hiring practices, some of the information that you'll read in our toolkit may resonate with what you already know. But the toolkit we're sharing with you wasn't designed as an equity, diversity, and inclusivity resource. International students and students who are newcomers to Canada and these other groups that we're calling students from international pathways, these folks are also women and queer people and people of color and people of faith. Very often, students from international pathways experience overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination. And I want to be clear that these 6 tools aren't some blanket solution to the deeply entrenched systems and beliefs that compound racial discrimination on top of gender discrimination, on top of discrimination against people who don't have an urban white lady accent like mine. Instead, these tools take a single issue approach, the issue of students who pursued their pre-university education outside of Canada. And we want to invite you to layer these tools in with a broad array of methods and strategies to cultivate inclusivity, methods and strategies that are already out there in the world. I'm thinking here specifically of work done in the States by Minda Hart of the Memo, and in Ontario by Jean Jameson of Turtle Clan. So these 6 tools, they're going to help you address this one aspect of the whole person who is your next potential hire. But we're hoping and expecting that these tools won't be the end point of your work to develop in your organization an inclusive environment that works well for everybody. So that being said, let me now invite to the virtual stage our 5 wonderful employer panelists: Natalie Guthrie, the Director of Human Resources at CENGEN; Kyla McLeod, who is Director of Student Services at Royal Roads University; Haley Kowalson, who's Recruitment Partnerships Coordinator at Skip the Dishes, which is the company that is getting me through COVID; Tenzin Dong Do, who is Senior Manager Early Talent Acquisition at Royal Bank of Canada; and finally, Fiona Bramble, who is CEO at Here in Canada. Folks, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'd love it if one of you could please begin by telling us about your journey to engaging students from international pathways in your workplace. What resources did you use to recruit, hire, and onboard?
Hi there. Maybe I can jump in. Letitia, it's Tenzin. Everybody can hear me? Excellent. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. Great to be speaking from Toronto, snowy Toronto today, to reach the audience here. Just a bit of background for myself. I'm with the early talent team at RBC. We're the campus recruitment arm of RBC. And with that, maybe if I can share what we've been doing as far as engaging with students and break that down a bit, and that may help understand the resources that we employ. So last year, so I guess in 2020, as we wrap the year up, we've welcomed over close to 1,800 students to RBC. Majority of those students came in the summertime, but we definitely understand the value of diversity. We know that when you have that diversity of thought for an organization like ours, where the competition is ready to take hold of you, we know that we succeed when we do have that diversity. And with that, we've been able to engage with many students. And I'm also happy to say we've been able to engage with many students who have moved to Canada to pursue their education, or moved to Canada after their education as well, I should add. Now with COVID, pre-COVID, it has been one of engagement. I think my last event was in Edmonton. We conducted a full day event with quite a number of schools in the Edmonton area. And it's our signature event called Explore RBC. That allowed us to impart a lot of tools, mental well-being, budgeting, lots of information students may be interested in. Not only local students, but international students as well. So, and then the second part of that event was actually how to get a cool job at RBC. And what we did was, many people may not be familiar with the roles at RBC. Most people will look at the bank and think the job is you're a teller, and that's the job that's only available. So to better help students understand us, we broke it up into 4 different sections, and they're more persona basis: client facing, head office, technology and operations. We also had operations. And then we had invited people who were in those roles to speak a bit about that role, and that made that intersection or transition into the bank a little bit easier. So with COVID, I guess the silver lining here for us with COVID is we've been able to reach students right across Canada through events like Zoom. We use a different platform, but what we do is, I guess, we welcome all students from any school right across from Canada, as well as outside of Canada, provided they can work in Canada. And that allows us to reach our goal of, our CEO placed a goal of 40% BIPOC for the summer. And I'm happy to say we've actually surpassed that goal. And I think it's taking advantage of these tools, such as WebEx or Zoom, and being able to reach the students in the virtual world, having chats with them, having weekly opportunities for students to engage with us. Those all help in attracting students to us and giving us an opportunity to meet students. We are a large organization, so we do have a couple other arms. We have a diversity and inclusion arm that works closely with our early talent team, and they help and support us in highlighting not only events, but events where newcomers are engaging in networking events with us. So they would run separate events, and through those events, we're able to see some strong students come into RBC. The other, I guess, piece I would also add is we bring in a student group not just in their final year, but right from the first year to last year. So if we were to look at our 2020 stats again, 50% of our students that joined us were in the first and second years, and 50% came from the third and fourth year. So you can see the benefit of, let's say, someone who doesn't have that work experience in Canada joining us right after their first year and gaining that work experience so they can convert that into a second year, third year, fourth year, and hopefully our goal from our banks is to convert that into a full-time after that. So we're not heavily concentrated with final year students, but we're, as I said, making it open to all students at all levels right across Canada. So those are things that have helped us attract the talent that we're looking for and help us also reach out to all the students that we can. So I guess, yeah, that is more of an overview, and I hope that sort of helps.
It's very comprehensive, Tenzin. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak a little bit about how you recruit, onboard, hire?
I can speak a bit about the SenGen process. And I saw something that was very interesting in the chat about funding, where there is a barrier about funding for resources because they're only funded for Canadians, Canadian citizen, or people who hold a PR. And that's where we actually were able to start from there. So we're a publicly funded non-for-profit, and our student programs are funded through public funds. And it was a lesson learned in the very early years. We had to be very creative with the language that we had to put in the agreements to ensure that our funding did reflect that we would support students that were legally able to work from any university or post-secondary institution across the country. So, sometimes it's like, oh, too little too late, wish I had known this before, but great lesson to learn if you're receiving funding is to take the opportunity to have a very serious look at the language that is in there, because yes, it unfortunately does create a barrier. We have found interesting ways around that where some organizations do fund students, such as MyTax and other organizations like that, who are able to fund them beyond those barriers and restrictions. So employers are still able to kind of overcome the barriers they had set for them, that they were imposed with public funds. So there is ways to go around that if you're really pushing for the diversity within your organization. One of the interesting things that I saw as well as we were going through the toolkit was how to bring in students with trying to take away your own barriers and biases. And I believe Shadab touched on that quite a bit as we were looking for the HR best practices and how to be able to kind of reduce our own limitations for bringing people in. One of the ways we were able to do that is well, number one, volume. When you have a large cohort of applicants, there's very little time to look at names. You go straight to the resume and straight to the qualifications. And the way our tool is designed, the tool that we use to put the resumes in, it doesn't blur names and qualifications. But it's almost designed to do it because the name is so part of the details that it gets lost in the screen that you see in front of you. So you go straight to the talent. The other thing that we did was parity within our wages for students. So our student wages are based on relevant previous terms of co-op education or relevant terms of schooling coupled with experience or experience itself, whether it be in Canada or any other country. So because we were able to do that, we were able to establish parity for roles, because what we were getting was a lot of students who have never done, who are, first, second, or third year. And just like Tenzin was mentioning, we do hire from all grades. It's not just first year or second year or third or fourth year. It's all levels of education. And having people who may be in their first year here in Canada, but already have a degree or two elsewhere. So we establish complete parity with recognizing the talent. So we were able to kind of put an equivalency measure to that and able to recognize skills and relevance to the job, to the role. And with that, we actually did achieve a parity level for all of our roles. discounting or not discounting previous experience. So it's those tools that we are able to manage ourselves, that we are able to put in place to ensure that we actually do have not just the diversity piece, that's where we've always done well there, but it's the inclusion part where, yes, we can have diversity, but if we marginalize our diverse staff with unfair wages or treatment or inclusion in our projects, we're not doing anything. We're just, maybe looking good for a picture. What we really wanted to do was ensure that we broke down that inclusion barrier to ensure that that we achieve that parity for everyone.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, especially, not saying, well, if you're in first year, your salary is X, because it recognizes and accounts for experience that may, come from other countries, which is wonderful to hear. My next question has to do more directly with the 6 tools themselves. And I'm wondering which of the 6 tools most resonate with you as an employer, and if you could say a little bit about sort of how they translate into your own organizations. Anyone want to speak first?
Can I take this, Letitia? Thanks. First of all, I want to thank Tenzin and Natalie for their really important work. Everything you said really resonated with me and I think everyone in this space, and it just feels great that we're moving forward together. Thank you. So I guess I should preface that we are a small not-for-profit organization, and I recognize that our kind of personalized slow cooker approach for recruiting and onboarding and supporting students from international pathways in the workplace might not be possible for larger organizations, or at the very least, it will look quite different. By virtue of our mission and mandate, we are an extraordinarily diverse organization. Our membership is probably made up of about 75% of students from international pathways. So our policies and our programs are co-developed by that diverse membership, our staff, and I feel like we already have a foundation, hopefully, for a successful workplace engagement and participation for these students. A couple of the tools that I wanted to single out today were tools 4 and 5, culturally sensitive job interviews and supporting onboarding. Those are a big part of the work that we do in kind of maybe an unconventional way. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what those processes look like in our organization. And I also wanted to reflect on tool 3 a little later on, but I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to move a little quickly through this. For us, for the tools 4 and 5 are interlinked. So I don't even know if we can call it a hiring process. It's very organic. It's more of an internship, mentorship model with some cohort components to it, I would say. So essentially we draft newcomers, including, as I said, our members, students from international pathways, into our volunteer base. And that's where more seasoned members of that base help to model and share our organizational culture. Volunteers are given varied and ample opportunities, even in COVID, to showcase their soft and hard skills. And so normally a volunteer will have volunteered for 6 months to a year before they're kind of moved up the ladder into what we call the HERE family. And the HERE family is both our supportive community of newcomers, but it also turns out it has served as an employee/team member incubator in many ways. So technically the meaningful elements of the job interview and the onboarding have already occurred long before we post a formal job or engage in a traditional interview process. So that's been really instrumental, that approach, in making sure that we all understand each other, we're all on the same page, they're committed to the work, they know what the work is, and lately we've actually even tailored the job descriptions to fit the team. Our mandate is set, but we have a lot of flexibility within it, and we work with the HERE family members to find out what work is meaningful for them. Can we tweak the job description a little bit? Can we add a title that will help them in their quest for the coveted PR? And in some ways we've sort of, maybe by default, but I'm kind of proud of it, we've become this stepping stone for those students who are engaging in that PR process. And we can give them that valuable work experience and what they're looking for. So yeah, just lastly on tool 3, and I might be an outlier here, but, and I'm fully aware of the stats and the data around name discrimination and the lack or the use of lack of Canadian experience as an excuse not to hire someone. And but I honestly feel that if an organization truly wants to build a diverse, inclusive workforce, that the language is spoken, gender, country of origin, not only should they be included, but it should be considered and valued accordingly. As an employer in a diverse organization, for me, that information is critical, ensuring meaningful representation. So I think anonymizing resumes personally is a step backwards and does not address underlying systemic discrimination. That's my humble opinion. So sorry to take up so much time. Thank you.
It's so hard to find this balance. That recommendation comes from what we know in the literature about systematic bias, and I don't like to use the term implicit bias because I think it sometimes is explicit. So that recommendation is sort of at a population level, but what individuals choose to do at an individual level, I trust your judgment. Anyone else want to speak to the tools that resonate for you?
Yeah, I can speak to that as well. I think I can kind of take the flip side from where Fiona was coming from with such a small organization. Though Skip did start small, I joined the company at around 50 people. Over the last 4 years, we've grown from that 50 into over 3,000. So what we've looked at is especially scaling those processes from the smaller company into what we've become today. I can speak on that same note. We also choose not to anonymize those resumes based purely in the fact that we understand that those with different backgrounds or non-Canadian backgrounds or names or histories, they come with experience that is not default in our society always. And those pieces of experience, those perspectives are going to be extremely valuable to ourselves in creating a diverse and inclusive environment. So when we see people who are perhaps females, if they are BIPOC individuals, if they come with external or international experience, that is of higher value to ourselves and how we choose to build our culture. We currently have 2/3 of our 3,000 staff are from international pathways, be it in some type of visa or working towards their PR situation. We're making sure that within our budgets, we are saying we want to make sure that we can bring on these students from international pathways, and we're not entirely looking at the baseline financially, because we understand that people with experience in other countries have perspectives that you can't put a financial dollar value on. They bring so many unique pieces of experience and just little pieces that you might not even understand in terms of their cultural differences and awareness that really help broaden and create a welcoming culture internally is what we found.
Any other thoughts?
Sure, I could just jump in really quickly from the perspective of the university college that is preparing the students for those transitions to come in. I really do appreciate the tool. I just want to nod to the fellow panelists that have just shared some of those thoughts, and I've been writing down notes, really resonate with some of the conversation that Tenzin was sharing around onboarding and community building, and certainly hearing that too with Fiona in the Here magazine, and how just incredibly impressed about the growth of Skip the Dishes. I just had to stop and pause and go, wow, to that. And I want to reflect a bit on the importance to me of the connection and relationship, and how the size of the organization doesn't need to interfere with that engagement that is so critical to the pathway of any employee. I can think of my own experience being Canadian, starting in an association, and my onboarding being, here's your keys, go, right? So I think with respect to really making sure our students are set up for success, when you ask what resonated, the onboarding piece, the relationship piece. How do we make the relationships last so that students are coming through and have the confidence to bring their best? I would certainly also agree with all the comments that have been shared about the experience that so many of our international students come with. coming from Royal Roads. The majority of the students that we work with, not all, but the majority coming through internship or a co-op-like experience will be at the graduate level. Many have already come with a master's degree and are getting their second master's degree or an additional degree. And so it is humbling to speak with some of these students and find out what they've already done before they've arrived here. So helping them translate that and connect and be able to share with confidence what that experience can contribute to an organization, I think can really come out in both those tools 4 and 5. And I know we're short on time. I just quickly wanted to nod to tool 6, where we talk about assessment and impact. Well, the assessment and the tracking pieces, because I think what that helps facilitate is an opportunity to reflect on what is the impact that my organization, big or small, has had from the recruitment, retention, and success of international students coming in through the organization. And that just creates greater learning and understanding and can improve processes and can do so much for, again, for the relationship piece. So I really, really appreciated the opportunity to have conversations with employers about, okay, so where have you seen change? Where are your numbers at now? How have they grown? Totally cool, Tenzin, to hear that you've exceeded goals in that area this year and during COVID. So I really like that tool 6. I just wanted to nod to that. I will pass it back.
So springboarding off Kyla's last point there, my final question for the panel is, what do you need from us, from the post-secondary institutions? What do employers need from us to implement better students from international pathways hiring practices?
So maybe I can jump in there. I think it's more from my experience, and maybe it's that everybody share definitely tools and education. So educating employers or decision makers with respect to international students and how flexible their visas are these days compared to maybe 5-10 years ago. So I speak to that because I was in the early talent space quite a number of years ago, and I've returned back to that. And one thing the hiring managers may be reluctant to hire an international student is because of probably past visa restrictions. And knowing that students now can come on a graduate visa, that they can work upon graduation, sometimes for a year, sometimes for 3 years, I should say, and sometimes definitely for 1 year. That offers a lot of flexibility and that investment in the student who will graduate and can start with the organization. So I guess many employers, I'm making a big assumption here, we're aware of that at RBC, and we try to educate our hiring managers, but that may not be the same case for all employers, and that may sometimes put a barrier for them in their thought.
Very helpful perspective. I know that not even all the employers that I work with are aware that international students can get a co-op work permit.
Yeah.
So just in the interest of time, I need to draw this panel to a close, but I want to thank all 5 of you for sharing your thoughts and perspective with us. It's really valuable for us to hear from you.
Well, what a great conversation we've had today as a group. This is an important discussion that I know we will continue to have. We appreciate the feedback that we've received from you all today. The recorded portions of today's session will be shared with the ACE-WIL membership in the coming months as a resource to support the use of this toolkit. We'll also be following up in the coming days with a survey to get further feedback from you on the format and contents of today's session. And we will share another copy of the toolkit and report with that message. So with that, I want to thank you all again for joining us this morning. Really appreciate your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.